All right. Okay, so this morning I want to just begin by giving you an opportunity. If you have had some reflections from yesterday, some questions, thoughts, or something that you walked away feeling, I wish we had talked about that from Joshua. Okay, is there anything like that before we jump back in today? Application a lot. Okay, so you appreciated application a lot. Good, good. Thank you. Yes.
In somewhere in Joshua it says that God completed everything that He promised, but then we see that a lot of the Canaanites and Philistines and people weren't driven out. So what does it mean when it says He fulfilled all of His promises, even though not all the land is actually conquered?
Yeah, so what it means is that, so Joshua's task was to eliminate the military threat, so to just conquer these kings, but they still had to, and he divided the land, but they still had to actually go in and possess the land. So I think in that sense it means that Joshua did what God asked him to do in actually taking the land, eliminating the military threat, but they still had to actually go in and settle in the land. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I've heard someone mention, I can't remember if it was in class or not, but a few of the tribes had actually settled east of the Jordan River, and that wasn't really, from my understanding, it wasn't really what God told them to do. So were they being disobedient in them settling there, or was that kind of fair game as well?
Yeah, when you follow the story of God wanting to give them land, He's wanting to give them the land of Canaan. And so that's beyond the Jordan River. I wouldn't necessarily say they were disobedient because Moses actually allowed it to happen. But I think God was thinking of, wanted to give them the land beyond the Jordan River, the land of Canaan. And, there are several reasons that have been given as to why God was, wanting all of them to be across the Jordan River. That would actually act as a protection for the children of Israel, that, people wouldn't just easily cross over to them and fight them and take the land back, and things like that. But Moses allowed them to stay on the east side of the Jordan. Good question. Yes?
Is there any symbolism in why they put the kings on the pegs, after they would take over the cities, that they would hang them on the pegs?
I don't think so. Okay. There could be, but I personally don't think so. I think it was just a way of dealing with them.
Okay.
Yeah. Staff, any other thoughts? Why they would put them in?
Is there any symbolism of 10,000 pieces of silver? Because that keeps coming up as price.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, I could be wrong, but personally, I don't think so. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, yes, thank you. Anybody else? So we're going to ask you guys to use microphones when you ask questions so that we can capture that on the recording. All right. Good. So let me just recapture what we have looked at so far in this time period. So the first we looked at the part of the book of Joshua that's dealing with the campaigns, the taking of the land and all that. And then the last bit is the giving of the land, or the division of the land, the allocation of the land. There's one particular story I want us to look at together, and that's the story of the altar. Towards the end of the book of Joshua, there's the story of the altar, chapter 22, verse 10. Chapter 22, verse 10. Where the Transjordan tribes, so the 2.5 tribes, Joshua comes to them and he says, you guys have been faithful. You've done what you agreed to do with Moses. And now you're free to go back to your families. Go back to your children, to your livestock. And they go back, but then they build an altar. And when the other tribes heard about the altar, they were pretty furious. They actually were ready for a civil war. Okay? They didn't appreciate that the 2.5 tribes had built an altar because they didn't understand. Okay? And until they talked about it. Now, I want you to turn to the person sitting next to you and discuss a little bit. Why do you think these guys were furious? Why do you think they did not appreciate the idea of this altar being built? All right, let's get some feedback. Let's get some feedback. Why do you think they did not like this idea? Yeah, the Western tribes. Any thoughts? Yes.
They thought it was for other gods, maybe.
It-
Like not the God of Israel, not Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. You think they thought they were starting some idolatry here?
I'll run the mic.
Thank you.
That's good.
Okay, idolatry, other gods. Somebody else? Anybody else? I heard some talking. Yes.
I think it could also have been like they might have been pissed because they thought it was disobedience because God had said they'd have one place to sacrifice to Him in the Promised Land. So by them building an altar, then they have two, which is one altar for one God, and it's in the Promised Land, not on the other side. They chose to stay on that side, so they can come over here to make sacrifices if they want to come and hang out. You know, like
Yeah.
I think it's like they'd be breaking their covenant if they did that, essentially, which would bring doom. So.
Good. Is there anybody else with a different idea, a different thought from what we've just received? All right. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 13. Deuteronomy chapter 13.
Which chapter did you say?
Deuteronomy chapter 13. Let me write it down.
Thank you.
I told you guys yesterday that my accent is a deep Zimbabwean accent, and sometimes you will not understand me. All right. Could I have a volunteer to read for us from verse 12?
When you begin living in the towns the Lord your God is giving you, you may hear that scoundrels among you are leading their fellow citizens astray by saying, "Let us go worship other gods, gods you have not known before."
Keep going until the end of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
In such cases, you must examine the facts carefully. If you find that the report is true and that a detestable act has been committed among you, you must attack that town and completely destroy it, all its inhabitants as well as all the livestock. And you must pile all the plunder in the middle of the open square and burn it. Burn the entire town as a burnt offering to the Lord your God. That town must remain a ruin forever. It may never be rebuilt. Keep none of the plunder that has been set apart for destruction. Then the Lord will turn from his fierce anger and be merciful to you. He will have compassion on you and make you a large nation, just as he swore to your ancestors. You good?
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so what you can see here is that the tribes that are west of the Jordan, they're basically living this truth out. They are wanting to make sure that the nation of Israel does not go back into idolatry, because they know the cost of idolatry. They know the price they will have to pay for idolatry. And this is the reason why they sent Phinehas, another representative, to go and find out, why have you guys built this altar? And I like the response. These guys were thinking future, okay? The Transjordan tribes. They said, look, we were thinking about our children. We were thinking in future. We didn't want your children to come and say to our children that we're not part of you and we cannot worship God. And this is the reason why we built this altar, so that it is a witness, not a place to sacrifice, not a place to worship, but it is a witness that we are one people, even though we're separated by the Jordan River. It's just an amazing story that shows us that the second generation, they're living out what God spoke to them through Moses. And they're very careful not to go into idolatry, because idolatry has a huge price tag attached to it. So I wanted us to look at that, because it gives us perspective, especially when we go into this next book. The other thing is that just before Joshua dies, this is now the end of the book, and he calls everybody. And he's basically talking to them about not walking away from God. He's challenging them to remain faithful to the covenant that God has given to them, or God gave to them. And you will notice that Moses also did the same thing. And as he was coming to the end of his time, God actually spoke to him and he says, look, Moses, you're about to go, but these people are going to forsake me. These people are going to walk away from me. And Moses had to write a song, and he taught the song to the people of Israel. And Joshua is doing the same thing, because he knows without strong leadership, these people are bound to walk away from God. And they're attracted to other gods around them. But in this book, they actually say, Joshua, whatever it is that you're saying we will do, we will not forsake the Lord. We are witnesses. That's what they say in this book. And of course, Joshua dies. And that leads us to the book of Judges.
Yes, Lord.
The book of Judges is titled by many the dark days of disobedience. The dark days of disobedience. So Judges chapter 2 verse 10. Judges chapter 2 verse 10. So in this book, we're introduced to the third generation. Okay? We've kind of briefly looked at the first generation and their disobedience, and looked at the second generation with their stories of mostly obedience. And this is the third generation we're introduced to, and it's not good news. Okay. Judges chapter 2, verse 10 says, "And all that generation were gathered to their fathers, and there rose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." This generation did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. Now, do you think they actually didn't know the Lord?
They chose not to walk in the ways of the Lord.
They made choices not to walk in the ways of the Lord. Because it's easy to assume, after reading this, to assume that they had no idea about Yahweh, they had no idea about God, or they had not heard the stories that Yahweh had done for his people. No, I think they just didn't care. This generation didn't see the value in walking with God and having a relationship with God. And this is the reason why they started actually finding other gods attractive and going after them. Very, very sad time period in the history of Israel. Okay, let's look at the failures of the third generation. So they gave up, number one, no possession. They gave up too quickly. They no longer acknowledged Yahweh, and there is no future leaders. It is a nation without role models, a nation without leadership. Joshua was a good leader himself, but he did not raise a successor. He did not raise somebody that would take after him. So after the death of Joshua and his contemporaries, the Israelites returned to serving Baal and Ashtaroth. When Joshua and his contemporaries died, they resorted to serving Baal, who's the Canaanite god, and Ashtaroth. So the time period that's covered by this book of Joshua is between 350 to 363 years. 350 to 363 years. So in those years, or in that time period, you're going to see the faithfulness of God and the unfaithfulness of Israel. Time after time, God remained faithful to the nation of Israel, even though they were continually unfaithful to him. God continued to keep his covenant despite their failure to do so. So the book of Judges can be divided into two sections, basically. The first section will give you an account of, the wars and the time of slavery, the time of oppression, and the deliverances. And then you've got some stories right at the end. Now, those stories are not, the book of Judges is not actually chronological, because those stories happen during the time of these judges, these deliverers that we're gonna look at. Before and after entering the promised land, God repeatedly gave the Israelites instructions to completely destroy the inhabitants of the land. God warned that if they didn't, they would be led astray by them into idolatry, and the curses of the covenant would come upon them. So I want to go back and look at the scripture that we have already looked at. This is in Numbers, and God is speaking to Moses, and he's saying, when you enter the land, if you do not destroy the inhabitants of the land, they're going to be a snare to you. They're going to be like thorns to you. Here's a question I want to ask you guys. The events of taking the land by Joshua happened sometime between 1406 and 1400. And when did Joshua die? 1375. Right, Joshua died in 1375. The very first sentence of the book of Judges says, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? Here's the question. What were they doing for 25 years? What was the nation of Israel doing for 25 years? 25 years between 1400 and 1375. What do you think they were doing? I'm hearing whispers.
Multiplying.
They were multiplying? Yes. I think it's true. They were multiplying. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas? Yes.
They're getting comfortable.
They're getting comfortable
Passive.
and passive. That's true. I think in these 25 years, they're getting used to living with their enemies. They're getting used to sharing their space with these enemies instead of driving them out. But I think the enemies are actually getting used to the idea of staying there. Right? You know, up to this point, they've heard stories of how the people of God, the Israelites, have driven the nations out. They've heard all those stories, but I think in these 25 years, they're getting used to the idea of we can actually stay here. We don't have to leave. So because of that, we see that the Israelites broke their covenant with God, and as a result, God began to judge them. So the book of Judges shows what happens when society slides into moral anarchy. I'm sure, as you read, have you guys read the book of Judges? Yeah. Did you come across this phrase that, and in those days there was no king, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. The book of Judges flows in cycles. The Israelites would they would sin against God or would rebel against God, and God would send them an enemy nation or people that would oppress them. And because of that oppression, the Israelites would cry out to God again and say, God, would you deliver us? And God would hear their cry and raise for them a judge to deliver them. And that judge would fight their enemies and deliver them, and there would be a time of peace. And after that time of peace, they would begin to forget again, and they would fall back into sin. Those are the cycles that you will see in the book of Judges. Okay. So this cycle is repeated 6 times in the book of Judges. 6 times in the book of Judges. Somebody mentioned yesterday that God says, if you do not drive them out, I will do to you what I had planned to do to them. I will do to you what I had planned to do to them. So in this book, we're going to see sometimes when Israel tries to actually go out and fight their own enemies or fight their battles, God actually is working against them. You do not want to have God as an enemy or on the opposing side. Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 20. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 to 18. Says, but in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God is commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. So Joshua led the people over and destroyed many cities and many peoples, which is the question that we're asked today. But Joshua 11, Joshua 11, verse 21 and 23. Joshua 11, verse 21 and 23. Would tell us some of the people that were not removed. It says, and Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and Ashdod did some remain. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments, and the land had rest from war. Okay, so it was now the responsibility of the third generation to actually go in there and completely possess the land and take the land and eliminate every threat. If you also read Joshua 13, verses 1 through 7, Joshua 13, 1 through 7, has a list of the land that was yet to be taken. List of land that was yet to be taken. Thank you. So the sad thing is that instead of the third generation actually going in there and possessing the land, they didn't. Only 2 tribes were successful. So if you read Judges chapter 1, which of the 2 tribes were successful? Sorry? Judah. Okay, so they asked the Lord who is supposed to go first. And the Lord said Judah. And Judah actually went in there and was very successful in their conquest. Okay? The other tribe. Ooh. It says the house of Joseph. The house of Joseph was successful in taking the land. The rest were not successful. So you are going to find a repetition.
It's on here, but it's not on this. Oh. Thanks, guys. There we go.
This phrase is going to be repeated in Joshua chapter 1, and they did not drive them out. They did not drive them out. They did not drive them out. Okay? Chapter 1, verse 27. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants. Verse 29 of chapter 1. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived. Verse 30 of chapter 1. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron. 31. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko. 33. Naphtali did not drive up the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh. And 34 says, the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. So it's not going down well for the rest of the tribes of Israel. So they were in the land, but the land was not totally theirs. So they lived amongst these people that they were supposed to destroy. All right. What I want us to do now is to look at these cycles. I want us to look at these cycles in the text. Okay, one example that I've done for you is you have seen there in chapter 3 of Judges, verse 12a, and you have slavery from chapter 3, verse 12b to 14, and supplication, chapter 3, verse 15a, salvation, chapter 3, verse 15b through 29, and the landed silence from chapter 3, verse 30. So as I mentioned, that God would raise judges that fought and delivered them. And when we talk about judges, it's easy to imagine a man wearing a robe with a hat, as in the legal sense. But these were people that were raised by God, and they were anointed by God to do certain tasks. So one couldn't just decide that, look, I want to be a judge. Because these judges were selected by God, and they were raised by God, and given certain ability by God to do certain things. They were charismatic leaders. And the word charismatic comes from the word charis, which means gift. They were gifted for that specific task of delivering the people.
Having said what you said, would Abimelech be considered a judge if he doesn't follow that pattern?
Yes, that's a good question. There are some people that do not think Abimelech is actually a judge because he kind of just showed up and said, I wanted to be judge. But the majority of people tend to agree that he's actually a judge because he actually governed the nation of Israel. But his way of coming into rulership or power was a little different. Good question. All right, so I have an assignment for you guys.
Yes.
I have an assignment for you guys to do with your seat partner. Okay? So how many? Okay, 3, 4, 5. Right. So you guys here, you're going to be looking at chapter 3, verse 7. That's a judge. And you guys will look at chapter 4. You guys will look at chapter 6, chapter 10, and chapter 13. Okay? What I want you to do is identify the scripture references making this cycle. And also identify how many years of slavery and how many years of peace for each of these. Does that make sense? Good. Let's just work with our seat partners.
Can you go back to the cycle and
You still need it? So you look at that cycle. So you identify the scriptures. Look at the cycle. So look at what verses are representing sin and which verse is representing slavery, because it's actually a cycle. Yeah, does it make sense? Are you guys done? Okay, a few more minutes. You guys are done? Which judge did you have?
6 verse 1.
Gideon.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Interesting guy.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 more minute. All right, let's get some feedback. Let's start with you guys here. So what I want you to do is identify the scripture references that are showing sin, slavery, supplication, salvation, and silence. Okay? Any volunteers from you guys? And also just mention which judge you looked at. Do you guys understand my question? Okay. So you looked at chapter 3. Okay? You looked at a particular judge. So what I want you to do is identify that cycle. Remember I mentioned that the cycle happens 6 times. I gave you one example and you guys did 5 together, right? So what I want you to do is identify that cycle with the judge that I gave you, or the scripture reference I gave you. Okay. Yes.
Sin was in chapter 3, verse 7.
Chapter 3, verse 7. Okay.
And then slavery was in 3 verse 8.
Okay.
Supplication was 3 verse 9.
3 verse 9.
Salvation was 3 verse 10.
Uh-huh.
And silence was 3 verse 10.
Okay.
8 years of slavery. 40 years of peace. The name of judge is Othniel.
Othniel.
Othniel, yeah.
Or Othniel. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Let's have a volunteer, or more than a volunteer, from this group here.
In chapter 4, we have after Ehud's death, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. And then we have that they're under King Jabin, or the commander of his army was Sisera, so he ruled ruthlessly and oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. And then they cry out to the Lord for help, and then God sends Deborah to judge the land and lead them. And then, where am I? What was the next part?
The years of silence.
They kill Salvation's 24. Yeah, so they kill the army, and they became stronger and stronger. And then they're in peace for 40 years.
40 years. 40 years of peace. Okay, great. And let's move to these guys here. Any volunteer?
Oh, right here. Got you.
What chapter is that?
6.
Chapter 6.
Wait, hold on. Sorry, I was on the page. So in 6 verse 1, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, and they were handed over to the Midianites for 7 years. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Then the Israelites cried out to God in verse 6. of 6, chapter 6, verse 6. And then the salvation was from verses 7 through 8. And then they had peace for 40 years from chapter 8, verse 28, I believe. Yeah, oh yeah, and the judge was Gideon.
Great, thank you. Right, let's move to this guys here.
Gotta look at your notes. Okay, we did chapter 10. So we found the pattern of sin 10:6. Do we want us to read it?
Yeah, just give me the
Okay.
references.
Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They served the images of Baal, Ashtoreth, and the gods of Aram, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia. They didn't serve him anymore. Then comes slavery in 10:7. The Lord burned with anger against Israel, and he turned them over to Philistines and the Ammonites. And for 18 years. Supplication 10:10. Finally they cried out to the Lord for help, saying, "We have sinned against you because we've abandoned you as our God and have served the images of Baal." And then on 15, "We have sinned. Punish us as you see fit. Only rescue us today from our enemies." Then salvation is in 16. Israelites put aside their foreign gods and served the Lord. And the time of silence was, "And he was grieved by their misery," on part 16b.
Good.
Yeah. And they didn't give a time for peace. It didn't say how many years of peace.
No worries. Thank you.
Nope.
Thank you. And I had to staff to you, Samson.
Okay, so chapter 13. They sinned in 13:1. They did evil in the Lord's sight. Then the slavery in 13:1, the second half. The Lord handed them over to the Philistines for 40 years. And then I don't think any of us really found supplication, but we think it's 13:5 when Samson's dad Manoah cries out to the Lord. Could that work?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, yeah. So Samson's dad cries out to the Lord, and that's supplication. And then salvation is, wait, where was the thing? Oh, it's in, wait, where's the chapter? 16:29. When Samson pulls down the temple. Yeah, that's salvation.
Good.
Yeah, and then the silence is 15:20 when there was peace for 20 years.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So that's the sixth cycle in Judges. In total, God provided 13 judges, 1-3. 13 judges. The one thing to note about these judges is that they were not perfect people. They had their weaknesses. Okay? For example, Samson. What were some of his weaknesses? Women. I have seen a woman. Go get her for me. All right. Samson slept with prostitutes. Gideon lacked faith and he fell into idolatry. Barak was fearful and weak. And Jephthah sacrificed his own daughter to fulfill a foolish vow. And Ehud was left-handed. Now, left-handed was considered a curse. If you were left-handed, that was considered a curse. And yet God would raise somebody like that to deliver the children of Israel. Now, what do you want to do with these judges? I know you guys have groups where you meet and you discuss and you observe stuff. What you want to do is look at the details, some of the details that are emerging out of these different people, because God does the deliverance differently each time. For example, with Ehud being left-handed, you know, you're going to be curious, ask yourself, this guy was actually searched because he went in to meet the king, right? The king of Moab, who had suppressed him for 18 years, and he was searched upon entering the residence of the king. How did they miss the dagger that he had, the sword? How did they miss that?
They would have checked his other thigh. His left-handed. So he would have
Yes, because he's left-handed, he would have strapped his sword on the right thigh. Okay? So they might have checked the other thigh. Right? And so you see God using these things that were considered weaknesses, and God uses them to deliver the children of Israel. So you want to look at these details and ask yourself, why is the author mentioning this? Why is this little detail mentioning this? And I see you're already doing it, making observations with 10,000 and this. Is there any significance? You can look it up if you're not sure. But this will actually help to dig up some stuff that we may not necessarily see at the surface. That will help us unpack the book. Okay. I look at Samson and I think, God, are you kidding me? Why did you have to use this guy? Couldn't you find a better guy to use to deliver the children of Israel? And you look at Gideon. Man, this guy just keeps testing the Lord. Okay, this time let's have the fleece word, and next time let's do it the other way around. I just want to make sure that you are talking to me and that you're going to do this. And why are you greeting me with saying, mighty man of valor, when this is happening to us? It doesn't seem like you are with us. What's happening? So Gideon is just really questioning the Lord here. And I'm thinking, God, couldn't you find more people of faith that you could have used? And God is using people with weaknesses. Guys, what this shows us is that the weak character of the judges made it clear that the deliverance was definitely from God and not from man. Deliverance was from God and not from man. God is the hero in this book. Any questions or thoughts so far? Yes.
Did you say, so Ehud, is that his name? Ehud? Is that his name?
Ehud.
So
Or
did you say
Ehud.
his weakness was his left, that it was...
Yeah, that was considered a curse, being left-handed.
So then was Deborah's, that she was a woman, considered in the Bible, in like the biblical times, that they would...
Yes, you could say that.
Likely, or what would you say her weakness was?
I don't think she had any particular weakness apart from the fact that she was female and she would not have been expected to be, leading the nation at the time. Any other question or thoughts? Okay. I want to just stop here and just process this application for us. God using people with weaknesses. God using people with weaknesses. Are there any people with weaknesses here? All right, so many times when you think about it as an individual, you think, God, you couldn't possibly send me to go and deliver that. Or you couldn't possibly send me to go and take the word because I have, and we're very good with listing our own weaknesses, right? We're very good in seeing our limitations. But I think what we're seeing here is God sees the potential rather than the weaknesses. And he relates with us based on that. And the encouragement I want to bring here is linked with the dream and the visions that God has placed on you Do not interpret that based on your weaknesses, because this is not about you. This is not about your weakness or people's weaknesses. I'm not saying let's not work on weaknesses, but I'm saying let's not judge what we can do or what we can't do based on what we think are our weaknesses or limitations. In my life, I have noticed that the biggest limitations is not what other people place on you, but what you place on yourself. Because people can say stuff about you. People can say you are not able to do this. And they can walk away. And you might believe it or not. But really the weaknesses that stop us in our tracks from walking with God and following God are those limitations we place on ourselves. I'm just from a humble beginning. I'm not educated. I haven't traveled the world enough. We have a whole lot of stuff. But I think what we can see here is that God is the hero. And if we walk with God, He will glorify Himself and He will use us. Amen. The other thing I want to look at is one weakness in this book is that there's no foresight. There's no thinking future. Okay? Everybody is doing as they see fit. There are no role models. There are no leaders. If there are no leaders, then there are no future leaders that are being raised. Right? What happened with Moses and Joshua isn't happening in this book, where Joshua was mentored to become the next leader. And we can see the effectiveness of that mentoring, that process, with Joshua now taking up the responsibility of leading these people into the promised land. And they go in and they take the land. But in this book, there is no preparing future leaders. There is no leadership development. Even these judges that are being raised, they just go in and they do what they're supposed to be doing, and eventually they sometimes fall into sin themselves or continue into their weaknesses without necessarily walking in there and developing the next leaders. So the nation of Israel is then stuck in a cycle of sin. Yes.
Do you think that's a mistake that Joshua made on not raising leaders?
So his question is, do I think that that's a mistake that Joshua made? What do you guys think? Was that Joshua's mistake?
Didn't God appoint Joshua and Moses
To raise them? To raise what?
raise Joshua up? So like,
Did God appoint Moses to raise Joshua up? I think Moses basically just picked Joshua. Like we discovered yesterday, Exodus chapter 17 is when we actually first hear of Joshua, with Moses saying to Joshua, you need to go down there, pick some men, and fight while we go to the top of the hill. So I think Moses identified Joshua and mentored him. Okay. But the question is, did Joshua make a mistake in not appointing the next leader? Yes? Was that his responsibility?
yeah.
Or was God wanting a different kind of leadership for the nation of Israel? Because it's either Joshua made a mistake or God was doing something here, or he was wanting a different kind of leadership. What do you guys think? Yes.
I think that leadership, you give what you have, and that person can take that on and add more to it.
Yeah.
I just think that maybe Joshua got caught up in what was going on around him, and it wasn't really emphasized. He didn't get repeated, but
Good. Thank you. I think Joshua could have raised a leader, but as we say that, we're going to understand that God, even right from the beginning, wanted to be the leader for the nation of Israel, right? God wanted to be the leader for the nation of Israel. So we see even with Moses, how Moses was very much in tune with God. He was very much in touch with God. You know, we see in the Pentateuch that Moses went up to be with God, and he would spend as long as he needed to be with God. He'd come back with instructions, and he'd basically lead. God was leading through Moses. So even though there was no specific leader that was raised by Joshua, if the nation of Israel wanted to follow God, they would have at least sought God, right? And why I'm saying that is because even after Joshua died, Judges chapter 1 verse 1 says, and they asked the Lord, they came and inquired of the Lord who was supposed to go first. So they could have just continued inquiring of the Lord, and God would have continued to lead them even with these different judges. But they stopped inquiring from God. And that was the problem. Good. Yes.
I was going to say, I think it's really interesting to see how quickly, like you said, it was just like 25 years, how quickly they were influenced by the Canaanites and Baal worship and idol worship. You know, like 25 years, that's not that long.
It's not that long, yes. Yeah. 25 years, they have turned their eyes from God, and they are following the gods of the Canaanites. Have you guys thought about why would the gods of the Canaanites be more attractive than Yahweh? Have you thought about that? Yes.
I think it's because Yahweh is more, Yahweh is very relational, so you're going to go into the presence and be in the relationship. When in relation, a lot of other religions are ritualistic, so you could physically do something and feel like you're getting somewhere. When in relation, Yahweh, you've got to go make that relationship.
Good. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, God was always disciplining them and wanting them to act a certain way, being very strict with them because He loved them so much. Because obviously, the other gods, it was fake, right? So they didn't receive any discipline from the other gods.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just the Lord is very firm with them. A lot of people don't always like that or want to obey that. That's my opinion.
Good. Yes.
They wanted to sin. There were gods that would let them sin or encourage them to.
They wanted gods that would give them space to sin and live whichever way they wanted, because God would not allow that. I mean, take for example one of the Canaanite gods, Molech. He's known as the fire god. So the Canaanites would actually bring their children and throw them into this heat chamber of this god as a sacrifice. They would bring in their sons and their daughters, their children, and throw them into the fire. What's attractive about that? Yahweh gave them life. Yahweh gave them children. And the Canaanites are giving their kids away in such a brutal way. What's so attractive about that?
I think it's really because it's the devil behind all that. We're worshiping gods that aren't really, they think it's some kind of god, but it's really the enemy that has such a strong influence on them. And that's why they're doing stuff that's so crazy, because it's really the enemy that's behind it.
Amen. As I think when we follow the history, we can understand the inclination of the hearts of the children of Israel. They were always bent on replacing Yahweh with something else they wanted. Something, their hearts were not with Yahweh most of the time. I'll be with you just now. You think about the time when Moses and Joshua went up to be with God, and Aaron was leading them, and how quickly they made the golden calf. And they said, look, these are the gods that brought you out of Egypt. When they knew that Moses is up the mountain with Joshua and they're talking to God. Even towards the end of Moses' life, God is saying, these people will forsake me. These people will walk away from me because the inclination of their hearts was not with God, but with sin, basically, wanting to be in charge, wanting to do the things that their hearts wanted to do. Okay. Let's take one more comment or question. Okay. All right. Good.
With the aspect of Yahweh as opposed to the other gods, I guess I just think about as us as people, the vulnerability of being in a relationship and yielding in trust and being vulnerable to not actually know how that's going to play out. And God trying to shape the people as opposed to something I can shape by what I, you know what I mean, like the control maybe factor.
The control factor.
Because in the sacrifices, it's like you appease and you manipulate to get, whereas in a relationship, there is no system. I can't transactionally, if I do this for you, you're going to do this for me, because that's not the basis of the relationship. And so I guess I just throwing like that idea of just even in human aspect, like it just seems so much easier to get what I want this way.
Yeah.
And not even recognize that what I really want, though, is that relationship inside my inner being. But it's like this, you know, back and forth.
I get that. I get that. And I would totally agree with you. I'm thinking of Asherah, where they would, the goddess of fertility. So the Canaanites, you know, just before the rain season would come and worship Asherah or appease, because they want what's the word? Fertility. They want the land to be fruitful, and they want animals to reproduce, and they want human beings to reproduce and have more babies, and therefore they would go and do that. And I think that just supports what I'm saying, that there's an aspect of a desire inside human beings to control something or to manipulate the outcome of something. Whereas with God, you just go in there and it's a relationship, and God had a particular way of dealing with his people. You know, he spoke to his people and he says, look, I'm giving you a way of life. I'm giving you the law. If you follow the law, you are going to be fruitful. But if you don't, there are consequences to that. But I think human beings, we always want something that we can control, something we can determine the outcome of. That's a good contribution. Thank you. I mean, if you think about even the Asherah worship that involved a lot of sexual excesses that are intended to stimulate or manipulate the coming of rain and all that, it's wanting to do things in their own strength. Okay? I mean, even myself, to be honest, I have tendencies where I would rather do stuff myself than trust God, because sometimes trusting God means waiting 15, 20 years. Right? And I don't want to wait 15, 20 years. I want it now, and therefore I would jump in and do it myself. Right? Because I would like to be able to control the odds and control the circumstances. Yes?
So do you think the Israelites knew the gods they were worshiping were worthless? They just did it because they didn't care?
Do I think The Israelites knew the gods they were worshiping?
Were worthless. But
Well,
like, do you think they knew they were worthless? But they just did it anyways because they didn't care.
to be honest, I don't think that I don't think they fully understood what they were doing. Because, like we said, gods, they're just gods. How can you worship something that is created, or something smaller than Yahweh, who's revealed yourself? I don't think they totally understood what they were doing. Yeah. All right, we've been going for over an hour now. It's time to take a break. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at some specific things and some application.